This week, Germany's climate election. The Green Party hit their best result ever, with the transition to net zero firmly on the agenda.
One thing is clear, climate is going to be one of the most important topics, no matter what kind of coalition constellation we will get.
Decarbonizing the energy industry in Europe's largest economy. We'll look at the options available for the new government as coalition talks rumble on.
The incoming commission has a lot on its plate. The incoming coalition will have to sort out many of its differences to really make that step change happen and cut those emissions to levels that are required.
Plus, the car industry is a pillar of Germany's economy. But can the country's automakers keep up with the EV transition?
It's really, really important that this is managed carefully and thoughtfully, this transition from the combustion engine to batteries, because so many jobs are at stake.
I'm Kaylee Lyons at Bloomberg World Headquarters, and this is Bloomberg Green. Germany has decided. Olaf Scholz of the center-left Social Democrats defeated Chancellor Angela Merkel's Conservatives in Sunday's extremely tight election. It sets in motion what could be months of complex coalition talks to decide who will lead Europe's biggest economy. A key theme in this run-up to the election was climate. Devastating floods during the summer campaigning period highlighted the risk that German voters face. And Germany's Green Party ended up with their best ever electoral result. We spoke to Sven Giegold from the German Green Party on election night.
I hear now other parties starting to stalk us for coalition. I'm looking forward for the office because it's very clear that there has been a huge defeat for the Christian Democrats. On the other hand, we have won a lot, so therefore politics have to become greener, more social, more European. That's what our voters want to see.
Well, joining us now from Berlin for more is our reporter Maria Tadeo, who's been covering every step of the election. So Maria, just talk us through the role that climate played in this vote.
Right, so we know that climate was a key theme in this election. You mentioned the floods that were devastating for regions in Germany. We also had a return of the Fridays for Future. That was a movement, of course, that was initiated by Greta Thunberg. If this is something that for many of the young Germans really, really matters, especially when you look at the changing demographics in this country. Climate is something they deeply care about. You also mentioned the Greens having this huge election night on Sunday. Annalena Baerbock, the Green candidate, at Wood Point, did lose some of the momentum in the campaign, but nonetheless, this is their best result in their history, being in third position. But this is not just about the campaign, is looking forward to the next coalition government. And the Greens will have their biggest say as their kingmakers in recent German politics. We know that whatever government comes out of this election, and it does look like it will be an SPD-led government in a traffic lights coalition, climate will feature very highly. The climate transition, going climate neutral, cutting emissions, reshaping the German industry, particularly the autos, in a way that they're more compliant with some of the regulation that's coming out of Germany, but also Brussels will be key on this election, as it was, but also in the future government negotiations, and of course the future government of Germany, which climate will be a defining issue throughout the next term.
All right, Bloomberg's Maria Tadeo in Berlin, thank you so much. And as Maria says, we have to look forward toward the future, and we'll do that with Guntram Wolff. He is director of the think tank Bruegel. He also previously held positions at the IMF, the European Commission, and the Bundesbank. So Guntram, great to speak with you. Can we call this election a watershed moment for Germany?
Well, thanks a lot for having me. Look, this has been a very important election, obviously, because it marks the end of Angela Merkel's chancellorship. She has been in power for 16 years, and now the country is trying to figure out where to go, what to do next, and how to shape its policies going forward. And one thing is clear. Climate is going to be one of the most important topics, no matter what kind of coalition constellation we will get. It is clear that the Greens, in all likelihood, will be in the government, and they will demand concrete action on climate. And even before, there had been broad agreement across the political spectrum, and there had been even a law to decarbonize the German economy by 2045, so earlier than the European Union wants to decarbonize its economy. So the intention is clear. the debate is now really about how to get there, what is the best approach, and how to make that politically actually acceptable and feasible.
Is the 2041 goal of carbon neutral Germany that the Greens have politically realistic at all?
Well, I mean, obviously it's not just the Liberals and the Greens that are voting and that are governing. It's going to be also the Social Democrats or the Christian Democrats, and both of those parties, so the old big parties, they want to preserve coal quite long as possible. I mean, the coal transition, exiting coal, is supposed to take a lot of time. I mean, the current agreement, I think, ends the last and stops the last coal-fired power plant in only 2038, which would be very late. So politically, it's very difficult because there are important constituencies in the coal mining regions, in the workers in the coal-fired power plants, the car industry. I mean, there's many sectors where of course, there's a lot of resistance, and striking the balance between, I think, the objective need of decarbonizing rapidly and ensuring that socially and politically this is viable is going to be extremely difficult, and it's going to be at the core of these discussions.
Yeah, the constituency factor is so important here. I mean, when you think about who voted for the Greens, it was primarily young urban voters. But do you see them expanding their voter base in the elections of the future? Are they just going to continue to gain more influence?
They are mostly popular among the young, but I think the topic climate change is certainly a mainstream topic, and more people realize that we need to invest massively in mitigation and in adaptation to climate change. So this topic will gain in importance, and the Greens will try to leverage votes and get more votes out of it. But other parties are also increasingly entering into that space, including parts of the Christian Democrats. So this will be a very politically contested field. In a sense, the result of last Sunday was a disappointment for the Greens. I mean, the Greens, I think, topic-wise, could have gained probably 20% or something like that, but they didn't realize their full potential.
Guntram, obviously, Germany is Europe's largest economy, so it's not just about what happens domestically within Germany. They have a massive role to play in Europe as well. How do you think the election result kind of shifts the priorities that Europe will have going forward?
Well, the European Union also has extremely ambitious climate goals, and it has the European institutions have put a package on the table that has to be now put into law. It's called Fit for 55, but it basically means we want 55% reduction in emissions by 2030 relative to 1990. And so this is an ambitious scheme, an ambitious goal. But it needs to be agreed on. And so here the German vote and the German positioning will be extremely important. And that concerns many regulatory aspects. So it will be very important who runs the German Environment Ministry and Energy Ministry. But it also concerns, again, the fiscal matters and the European fiscal policy making. And so that's where the Finance Ministry, the German Finance Ministry, will be key. Who will run the German Finance Ministry? Will it be Christian Lindner from the FDP, or will it be Robert Habeck from the Greens? I mean, that will be quite decisive also on the fiscal policy debate at the European level.
All right, well, it may take us a long time for us to figure out what exactly the German government is going to look like going forward. Thank you so much for your insight, Guntram Wolff. He is director of Bruegel. Coming up, key energy issues divide potential partners in a future German government. How will climate politics shape the coalition talks? We'll discuss next. This is Bloomberg Green.
I'm Jennifer Zabasaja, and here's everything you need to know in green this week. China's oil giants are taking their first steps towards going green by producing more fossil fuels. The country's oil companies are increasing natural gas production as a way to quickly reduce emissions in the short term. That's according to a report by Columbia University's Global Energy Policy Center. China has committed to carbon neutrality by 2060. And Walmart is looking to sell more sustainable debt amid pressure for the retail retail industry to reduce its carbon emissions. The world's biggest retailer made its debut in the green bond market earlier this month with a $2 billion offering. That was the largest ever from a U.S. corporation. And finally, banks are earning big money from underwriting ESG-related bond sales. Financial institutions have earned about $3.6 billion in fees in 2021 from arranging sales of bonds advertised as instruments of green, social, or sustainable development. That's according to data compiled by Bloomberg. That's more than double the $1.6 billion banks pocketed so far this year from issuing debt for fossil fuel companies. I'm Jennifer Zabasaja, and that's your Green Brief. Kaylee?
Thanks, Jen. Now, it's often been the voices of young people that have pressured governments around the world to focus on the risk posed by climate change. Bloomberg's Ryan Hesketh has been looking at the role that youth climate activists played in Germany's election.
As Germany headed to the polls, one issue drowned out almost all others: climate change. Outgoing Chancellor Angela Merkel promised hope for net zero, but it remains to be seen what path her successors will take. In a year where almost 180 people lost their lives to extreme flooding, this election raised the political stakes of tackling the climate.
Studies are quite clear that the majority of Germans and also the majority of voters from each party are in favor of good and quick climate action. Pretending that there was a lack of will from the public in any kind of generation, that doesn't really match what we know about society. We actually see huge support also coming from some of the industries who are seeing that right now, also in economic terms, it just makes so much sense to be ahead of things, knowing that the least affordable for everyone is delaying action.
Luisa Neubauer has been campaigning throughout the election, watching as climate became a key battleground. The Green Party gained strongly, buoyed by younger voters, Germany's increasingly extreme weather, and mass climate protests.
This election is not just an election for 4 years. This is an election that counts for, almost a century. We see that there are some parties who have a difficult time, accepting that the climate crisis is an immediate threat, and we have others who are kind of further down the road. But at the end of the day, whatever the coalition will be, of course, we won't get to a 1.5-degree pathway. That's why we're mobilizing the public. That's why we ask everyone to not just go and vote, but to also join us on the street, as the pressure is obviously needed more than ever.
It'll be a while before we know the exact makeup of Germany's next government and what approach they'll take to climate. What's certain is the public's demand for action before it's too late.
But the election is not everything. We need people also to pressure political leaders and the future government into places where they right now don't want to be, in a place where they actually commit to 1.5-degree climate action.
Bloomberg's Ryan Hesketh there. The German parties are locked in coalition talks that could drag on for months. The outcome will have a major impact on energy transition policies. All the potential coalition partners agree on the need to decarbonize power, but there's divergence on the best path forward. From renewable energy targets to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, several stumbling blocks could be in the way of a future government. Let's get into those issues now with Bloomberg NEF analyst Antoine Wagner-Jones. So let's talk about that incoming coalition, because we don't know exactly what it's going to look like yet at this point. The coalition building is underway. Whatever form it eventually takes, how is that going to impact the energy transition in Germany?
Yeah, that's a great question. So right now, we still don't know exactly what it's going to look like. We have an idea, and there are several potential partners that will play a key role. But when we see how that might affect energy policy, we can break it down into maybe 3 buckets. You have the issues where the cleavages are most clear, and the coal transition, for example, is one of them. There's a coal phase-out target for 2038. The Green Party, a likely partner, wants to bring that forward to 2030. There's going to be some intransigence there, and that's going to be a very decisive issue. On the other hand, you've got the second bucket, maybe, which is issues where there's broad alignment in terms of the importance of carbon pricing. Everyone agrees on that. In terms of reducing the energy levy on retail electricity bills, again, broad alignment. The third, and maybe most interesting one, is where everyone's agreed that we need to build more renewable power. We need to have hydrogen play an important role. But in terms of putting in place the subsidy schemes, the reforms that are very difficult to, for example, set apart a given percentage of land for building wind and solar plants, that doesn't seem like it's going to come out and is going to be as likely. So it's a mixed picture, and that's what's going to make the next few months very interesting.
So in addition to Germany's political considerations in the coalition building, it also, like the rest of Europe, is in the middle of a pretty significant energy crunch. And Nord Stream 2 has been a very difficult political conversation to have really over the past several years. And I'm wondering how that changes given the necessity to get more natural gas into Germany.
So again, that has been at the forefront of many people's mind recently. And really the Nord Stream 2 crisis is one that predates the energy crunch. It's been ongoing for many months now, many twists and turns, and any real guess on the outcome is likely to be very speculative. But what we can say is that it's a bit of a fudge in terms of getting the permits sorted, the sanctions situation sorted. Decisions will have to be made from, for example, the German regulator on what's going to happen. But what I can say is that in a situation where we have high gas prices and we are having supply shortages, that does lend credence and does lend weight to arguments that we need this pipeline to come on now. Whether or not that's borne out by the facts is another question. But in terms of the political argument for getting this sorted in a period over the next few months where there's going to be a lot of negotiations, a decision is unlikely to be taken against Nord Stream 2, well, that's very likely. So we'll have to wait and see. No decision is due for the next few months, but it's something that will be at the top of the agenda for the new government, and one issue that it's likely to be quite torn on as well.
All right, Bloomberg NEF's Antoine Vanier-Jones, thank you so much. Coming up, Germany's auto lobby predicts the shift to EVs could eliminate 215,000 jobs by 2030. We'll discuss the challenges ahead as the car industry looks to decarbonize. This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York, I'm Kaylee Lines, and this is Bloomberg Green. Germany's car industry is a pillar of the country's economy, but it's been on the back foot in recent years with a high-profile emissions cheating scandal and a struggle to keep up with competitors like Tesla in the race for electric vehicles. Bloomberg's Matt Miller went to the Munich Auto Show to get a sense of the key challenges facing Germany's car industry.
Germany's automakers have been a symbol of the country's economic miracle in the 20th century. But as we move deeper into the 21st century, they've been dogged by international competitors, forced to cut headcount and spend billions to electrify their fleet. German manufacturers like BMW and Volkswagen have almost been dragged kicking and screaming into the electric era after a huge diesel scandal and under very strict EU regulations. Plus, they've been motivated by the giant market cap of Tesla. Germany's political parties also continue to pay lip service to the green revolution with bonuses for electric car buyers as well as targets that they've set. For example, the Greens and the SPD now aim for 15 million EV sales by 2030.
Now electromobility is really keeping up the pace, and we are right in the middle of it.
We need time to get electric, because we need the capacities, the plants for the battery cells, and that will take time.
We are accelerating our path towards full electrification, and in fact, we're really going to go for it and see if we can convert our whole portfolio to fully electric by the end of this decade.
Now, electrification doesn't necessarily help with the job cuts. It takes fewer people to build electric motors. One survey says a quarter of the industry's jobs will be obsolete within the next 10 years. But of course, the green revolution doesn't stop with electrification. In fact, brands like Audi and Volkswagen believe that the shift to automated driving could be even more transformative than EVs, and they're going to have to add headcount to make that a reality.
Bloomberg's Matt Miller there. And we're joined now for more by Craig Trudell, our autos editor. So Craig, let's talk about the kingmakers in a potential coalition, the Free Democrats and the Greens. What do each of them want the auto industry to look like?
Yeah, this is going to be really interesting to watch play out. You have a situation where, the Greens were looking like front runners a few months back. They are now in a position of having come in sort of a distant third. They want very different things from what the Free Democrats want. So speed limits on the Autobahns, solar panels on every roof. They want more public transport and bike infrastructure rather than more cars. They're clearly pro-electric, though. And so, this is a situation where we're going to have to sort of square what the Greens want with the Free Democrats, who have a position of wanting to pull back on the very supportive policies for EVs, the supportive but very costly incentives that have helped Germany sort of catch up in the electric revolution. They're leading the way in Europe in terms of the amount of uptake of electric vehicles. But it's a case where, if those incentives are pulled back, that is a huge risk to the consumer that is showing interest in electric vehicles, but doing so in part because of this huge amount of state support.
But are they not going to have to be forced into electric vehicles in the future, given some of the regulations we're seeing, not just in Germany, but Europe more broadly?
Absolutely, that's something to watch as well. From the regulatory perspective, on the horizon, the European Union talking about targeting a phasing out of the internal combustion engine. That's going to be something that the next chancellor is obviously going to play a huge role in sort of determining whether that is pulled off. We're already hearing sort of grumbling from other states like France and Italy as to whether or not they're comfortable going that far. And this has huge implications for an industry that is so crucial to each of those countries.
Well, let's talk about that would-be next chancellor, Olaf Scholz of the Social Democrats. He's traditionally been pretty supportive of the auto industry. Will that change if he becomes chancellor?
I think it's a huge risk, right, to take on an industry that's, relied upon for so much employment. So I do think that there's a situation where, we maybe don't find ourselves in the old times of sort of the industry being coddled was a word that we've used in a recent story. But we will see a situation where, the politicians in Germany understand that, where their bread is buttered, if you will. And it's really, really important that this is managed carefully and thoughtfully, this transition from the combustion engine to batteries, because so many jobs are at stake.
And we can talk about the policy angle all we want, but at the end of the day, it's automakers that are going to be the ones that have to make changes. How prepared are they to undergo this transition?
They're really making a compelling case at this point in terms of how ready they are. They're talking about, massive investment in batteries, a lot of product on the way. We just heard from Matt. And, at the Munich car show, we saw so many electric vehicles that are coming from the likes of Mercedes and VW and BMW. But this is a case where it is going to take some time. While there are a lot of products and a lot of battery plants on the way, they will take years to go up. And this is a situation where, this is going to be both very costly and complicated. The skills associated with putting together a combustion engine don't necessarily translate one for putting together a battery. And so this is going to be very tricky for these companies.
Bloomberg Autos editor Craig Trudell there. So from autos to Nord Stream 2, it's clear climate will be a defining theme of German leadership post-Merkel, whatever the coalition looks like. That's it for this week's edition, but keep the conversation going. Follow us on Twitter @Climate. I'm Kaylee Lyons from Bloomberg's World Headquarters in New York, and this is Bloomberg Green.